knowledge and experience is the most valuable asset in delivering measurable results. Please join us as we develop the Catalyst 2030 blueprint for the 3 R's of disasters.
Hello, everybody. That's wonderful. Firstly, a very warm welcome to you all for our session on the 3 R's of disasters: readiness, response, and recovery. I'm Alan Braithwaite. I'm a UK philanthropist and social entrepreneur with a special interest in India. That's how I've come to Catalyst. And somehow I got the job of chairing the Catalyst 2030 issue-based group on disasters. And actually, I'm not regretting it. It's exposed the most wonderful insights, and the Catalysts have a huge wealth of resources. So we only started in March, so I can't tell you about huge outcomes yet, but we've been making some good progress behind the scenes. And our mission is to discover and determine how social entrepreneurs can engage with disaster agencies and influence the outcomes of disasters around the world. So what business model might be appropriate for that? We have panelists and attendees from all over the world. It's a wonderful mixture, and it does emphasize the global village in which we live, and I can remember that from my business school. I'm particularly grateful to William from UNHCR and Massar from DHL, who've joined us from outside the Catalyst firmament. And that's one of my key goals with this group, is to connect us across the world. Before I start, I'd like to think briefly with you all about the situation in India, and remember the people there in their struggle. It is the most appalling tale, and emotionally, as you will have gathered, I'm hugely connected. So I understand how traumatic that is, but then again, we have to remember people in Colombia and Myanmar, to name just another 2. So this is a issue across the world. Finally, 2 things. Firstly, the session will be recorded, so it will be available afterwards, because I can see that people are still joining us. And secondly, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. That may be quite difficult to follow, but I will try and sift with Mariana, who's our technical support, to try and pick up your questions in the discussion phase. So those are the sort of housekeeping notes. Hopefully that introduces the session. And I've asked each panelist to spend not more than 8 minutes each, just talking about their life experience of disasters. So how have these things touched them? And then if there were just 3 things that they could wave a magic wand at to fix it. And I've just forgotten, I was going to tell you about the ostrich. I'm sorry about that. So the ostrich is the most enormous paradox, because it's a much maligned bird. It doesn't stick its head in the sand to avoid disasters, but we humans do. So how do we fix that? That's part of the mission of this group. So Meenakshi, you're the first on. Hopefully that's a good introduction, and over to you for your life experience.
Thank you, Alan, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meenakshi Gupta, and I'm logging in from India. I'm a founding member of Catalyst 2030 and the co-founder of Goonj. It's a 22-year-old nonprofit which is working to bring dignity, development, and equality to the most neglected people across India. This is a especially tough time for all of us in India, as you know. Goonj uses urban surplus material as a new non-monetary currency for this work. Alan, this is a very, very timely conversation that we are having here. And I hope it leads to some deeper outcomes. I would like to share some of the insights from our own 2 decade disaster response work around the 3Ds: disasters, development, and dignity. And I like to start with disasters because that's what we are all in right now, frankly speaking. In the last decade in India, working at the ground zero of humanity, in this land of rich geographic and cultural diversity, we have seen disasters of all kinds become more frequent. These are happening at places that had never earlier seen disasters. And people, organizations, and entire systems have been caught unprepared in these disasters. But of course, the worst hit are the poorest and the most neglected people. And now, COVID, of course, is a global disaster, but much like any other disaster, it has surfaced and intensified already present inequities, gaps, and injustices on a massive scale. So it just basically tells us that we have to stop looking at disasters as one-off events, giving knee-jerk reactions, and we have to start thinking of them as part and parcel of our lives. We know that poverty is the biggest ongoing disaster for a vast majority of humanity, and we don't till we don't address the deep rooted causes of disasters with the same urgency and attention as we do to natural disasters and pandemics. If we don't address it with the same thing, if we keep looking at it as separate from poverty, we will just continue to repeat the loop of disaster response. Second is on development. Earlier we had MDGs and now we have SDGs. And according to many estimates, as a matter of fact, there is little hope that we will achieve these by 2030 unless some big global changes don't happen fast. And from here in India, looking back at the last 1 year and what's happening right now, I can tell you that all the development work has fallen back in a big way. Our work with Goonj and for many other agencies and many other organizations, that has been our work was largely about bringing people up from -1 to 0 on the scale of development. But with COVID, now the struggle has gone back to the struggle for survival. So that is where what the reality of development work today is. And the biggest thing I wanted to talk about today is the dignity part. And I ask for all of us to reflect at this moment in COVID as a global pandemic that, and with a lot of humility, that with all the massive resources and all the expertise and all the good intentions of the world, why is poverty still the first SDG? Why has a pandemic brought us down on our knees? Is there something fundamentally wrong in the way we are doing things? Is it perhaps our arrogance of being the experts that's not letting us listen to and work with the people who work with their hands, that put the food on our table and provide all the services that so that we have a comfortable life? Has the development sector and the disaster response models of the world been disrespectful to the people who are the nurturers of our land, our water, our forests, but who don't speak good English, can't log into the world the way you and I do? I speak for acknowledging their dignity, their wisdom, their efforts, and contribution to the world, and acknowledging that as long as we try to be the experts only, it will always be inadequate or incomplete or irrelevant. Call me a purist, but I believe we need to relook at the present models of development and disaster response to make them more respectful of people and their dignity and acknowledge their place in the world as equal stakeholders. The three wishes, Alan, that you've asked me to identify, basically, my first wish would be for dignity instead of for charity lends to disaster response and development work, which acknowledges with humility the massive wisdom of nature, people, and the realities of various contexts. The second wish from my side would be if we can get different sectors to work together on disaster response in the non-disaster time by creating cross-sectoral alliances on national and global levels with pre-committed resources for more rapid response. Because that's the biggest struggle that first responders as social entrepreneurs and nonprofits we face, that the resources have to be raised right at the time of the disasters. And the third wish is for the world to first improve all that we have before changing things. Our world, I believe, has all the things that it needs. Let's focus on improving it and repairing it with a peer-to-peer model of disaster response and development with co-learning and co-creation. Thank you. That's all from me.
That's fantastic, Meenakshi. Thank you. And as I said, we're all thinking of what's happening in India, and it's a dreadful experience, I know. Absolutely brilliant. Gabby, I'm going to ask you to contribute now. So you're on mute, but that's the classic Zoom horizon, isn't it?
Thank you, Alan. Well, I want to share a life experience. I think it's the best way I have to explain my relation with the humanitarian aid. The first time I worked during an emergency was during the Vargas landslide in Venezuela in 1999. On that occasion, more than 30,000 people died and more than 250,000 were evacuated or lost their home. It was a major, major disaster, especially for Venezuela, a country that in that time never had a disaster like that before. I was a reporter for a local radio, and I arrived at the scene of the tragedy the next day. And that same day, hundreds of volunteers and family members arrived looking for the people who had buried. We spent the day walking among people's bodies and belongings before help arrives. The authorities and the humanitarian aid groups arrived 2 days later. Imagine the frustration of the people that already have 2 days walking in the mud, surrounded by dead bodies and by the destruction of the emergency. And I remember my surprise when I asked to a representative of a very well-known disaster response NGO what it had taken so long to get there. And he answered me, we did not have the best and the trucks with the organization logo. I confess that I was absolutely disappointed, you know. I was in shock, actually. And on that occasion, being a reporter allowed me to observe how disorderly and erratic aid reached a community, you know. The community has suffered in a tragedy, and these guys were more focused on their own image and their own teams than the people. And I was absolutely frustrated. Years later, when I leave the sector of the journalism and I create TAP Foundation, our organization, we decide not to attend to humanitarian crises or emergencies because we weren't disagree with the mechanism of attention to the victims. We were surprised to hear that most of organizations do not have traceability of the donation they deliver. In many cases, the pressure and the resources available to them force them to deliver what is necessary to the community and leave them without really knowing who are the families that need help most. And we decided to focus on reconstruction or long-term development processes instead of working in humanitarian aid. But I live in Latin America, I work in Latin America, and Latin America is a region where disasters occur every day. Millions of people do not have access to food. Thousands lose their home and belongings each month due to floods or simply due to conflicts that cause them to move from one settlement to another. And that's why we returned to work in humanitarian care. But we do it differently. In first place, reducing the cost of our organizations and expenses to the minimum. So everything we collect can benefit directly the community. And the only way that we find to do that was working directly with the community's leaderships and with logistic networks. And that allows us to reduce cost of transportations, loading, and equipment in every community that we work. The second is that we use technology to create a real-time database of the victims and their requirements. And that process allows us to cross data with the offers of the donors, and guarantee that there is not oversupply in a community or that food and medicine is not wasted. And for us, it's very important to understand how that data could also help to identify patterns of violence, criminal gangs, human trafficking, and other kind of problems that you can find in the communities that are suffering also for the emergency. The third element that we bring to our work in humanitarian aid was the fact that we share information with other humanitarian aid agencies. When we work in a community, we share every data that we found there or every information that we have with the other organization, because in that way, each organization can know what the other has delivered and to whom. And we know who has already benefited and what is missing in the community. And we can be more effective and more collaborative. And we also collect evidence of each delivery of humanitarian aid. It does not matter if it's 32,000 families affected by the floods in the Chocó or 1,000 families that lost their homes in Providencia because of the hurricane. We always have photographic evidence, signatures, and supports of every help that we deliver to the community. In this way, we can guarantee our donors the traceability of their donations. You know, it's not just put it in the community and go away. It's understand who is the family that needs most and deliver the help directly to them, and also give to the donors the information about the family that they are helping. And finally, and the most important thing for us is that help us not end when the emergency passes. You know, in all territories where we work, we promote reconstruction projects and community-led development. We don't work with governmental reconstruction projects because most of the times they are inefficient. And I'm sorry if I'm not polite, but that is the truth and we know it. And we prefer to work with the community directly and create the programs with them. And of course, support the local governments and the regional governments and the huge programs that most of the times the national governments create for reconstruction, but from bottom to top, to allow the community to have voice in their own development, to be more effective and to do it with less resources. And about my wishes of if I could change something in humanitarian aid and disaster relief processes, I think I will change the way of financing the actions by delivering resources more directly to the grassroots organizations. They know the community, they know how to do things with less resources. They are not spending money on vests or trucks to get to their community. And the other will be to analyze and share the data on the needs of the community and be more exigent on the traceability of the donations. It's not possible to have incredible, huge international organizations without any traceability of their donations. I think we need to be more exigent with all of us, and we need to create a way to be more accountable, not only with our finance in our organization, also with the donations that we receive for the communities. That will be my 3 wishes.
Thank you,
Alan.
Gab. Thank you, Gabby, so much and we'll move straight on to Elizabeth from Build Change. Hello, Elizabeth. You're
Hi,
there.
Alan.
I can see you.
Yep. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to be here. My personal experience with disaster didn't actually start with a disaster. It started with housing. I grew up in a small town outside of Chicago. My parents didn't have the opportunity to go to college. My dad owned a small business in the construction sector. So my sister and I both worked for him over the summers as bricklayers. So we built houses growing up. Fast forward to grad school, I studied engineering at UC Berkeley. And while I was in grad school, there was an earthquake in Gujarat, India, near Bhuj, that killed about 20,000 people. And so my story kind of goes through India as well. When I was in grad school and that earthquake happened, it was so clear that this is a man-made disaster. It wasn't the earthquake that killed people, it was the collapse of poorly built buildings. So I spent most of 2003 on a Fulbright fellowship in Gujarat, traveling around, talking to people, NGOs, homeowners, everyone who was involved in that disaster. And it was a very interesting learning experience for me because, of course, I got off the plane thinking, yeah, I'm an engineer and I'm a construction worker. And of course, I know how to build a disaster resilient house. But when I got on the ground and started talking to people, it was so much more than engineering and construction. It was about homeowner engagement. It was about dignity, like Meenakshi says. And it was about the history of how houses had been rebuilt in disasters in India previously. There was an earlier earthquake in 1993 in Maharashtra, in which the government used primarily a top-down approach. So they gave houses to people. They used architects or designers from outside the state. So they had all sorts of issues with appropriate architecture, with enforcement of construction quality. And there was a lot of pushback on those approaches. So when Gujarat came along, the government basically gave people two options. One was to get a house built for you by an NGO, so the top-down approach, no choices, or to use conditional cash plus technical assistance. So this is where the homeowners make the decisions. They choose the materials, they choose the architecture, they choose where is the toilet, they choose where is the door. And when I talk to people, the folks who had gone this direction, conditional cash plus technical assistance, were so much more satisfied with the outcomes. They were able to add in their own money, they were able to create a space for livestock. And the majority of these homes had actually followed the rules for disaster resilience. This is the beauty of this type of approach. It puts the cash and the decision-making in the hands of the homeowner, right? But with strings attached. The money is given out in installments. So if you don't follow the building standard, then you have to drop out of the process. So I was completely inspired by this. And this was not engineering. This was a model. This was an approach for post-disaster housing. And so fast forward, this is the approach that Build Change has used over the last 17 years. Now we've been in 24 countries. We've operated after multiple large disasters: China, Philippines, Nepal, Haiti. I've lost track, I think, of the number of disasters that we've worked at over the years. But yes, Anthony says disaster relief starts at home. So it's always been about housing for us. And it has always been about enabling the homeowner to drive the process. Instead of coming and giving someone a house where they have no inputs and no decision-making and maybe no opportunity to use local labor and put money back into the economy, instead make it about enabling the homeowner to drive. So that was the first system Build Change set out to change, the way NGOs approach post-disaster housing. And now we see this model used all over the world, homeowner-driven, conditional cash plus technical assistance. Now, we also set out to change another system, and this one was related to upgrading existing damaged buildings. So when we started working back in India, there was one very limited example of an attempt to retrofit existing buildings or to strengthen existing buildings. And we made that mainstream after the earthquake in Haiti. In Haiti, a lot of buildings were damaged and they could be saved. That asset value could be saved for a very small amount of money. Those buildings could be retrofitted. So look at the alternatives. If a homeowner has the alternative of strengthening their existing asset versus living in a very small temporary shelter. We want to enable them to strengthen and preserve that existing asset. And we can do, and we've shown that in Haiti and Nepal and elsewhere. So that's the second system we set out to change. The first one was the way the NGOs approach post-disaster housing, shifting to homeowner driven. And the second system was basically upgrading existing buildings as an option in post-disaster. It is possible to strengthen a damaged building. You don't need to start from scratch all the time. Just like Meenakshi said, isn't it better to strengthen damaged buildings or improve what we have before we start changing things? So that's the third system that we set out to change. Wouldn't it be better if we were more prepared for disasters and strengthened buildings before the next disaster? So for the last 7 years, we've been working on that as well. In addition to responding to disasters, we have been working to prevent them. So we started off in Colombia, and the Colombian government now has a home improvement program called Casa Digna, Vida Digna, which we have been supporting the Colombian government to implement. Everything from assisting with developing an operational manual, technical platform, integrating how you assess a building and determine how much cement and steel you need, to integrating that with the subsidy program, to rolling out the system on the ground with government contractors. So this is a huge step forward in that before folks were not really prioritizing strengthening and upgrading existing housing to resist disasters. And we have now mainstreamed that in several locations. In the Philippines, we have a parallel program which operates with the private sector, in that it relies on a loan product from microfinance institutions. So in all of these programs that Build Change implements, we look at the problem holistically. We have to overcome these three barriers to adoption: people and policy, access to financing, and technology. And so in Colombia, we have access to a government subsidy. The homeowners have access to a government subsidy. In the Philippines, it's a private lending model. But within all cases, there's a technical platform that needs to be put in place so that we are able to roll out at scale. So the three things that I'd like to change: first of all, every home is disaster resilient. That is my ultimate goal. Everyone lives in a disaster resilient home. Second thing, for funders to drive more investment in systems change. It's a very simple thing, but there's a lot more that can be done in terms of changing systems around post-disaster housing, around prevention. And the third thing is Build Change has, after operating in 24 countries after 17 years, we are finally bringing our work home and launching a program in the United States. There is still a disproportionate effect of disasters on lower income populations of all races and people of color in my own country. So we are launching a program here. So my third wish is that we bring our innovative theory of change home to the United States. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I love that. Bring it home as well. That's so powerful. Straight to Massar and participants should know this is the first time I've heard these messages, so I'm just absolutely overwhelmed. Massar, over to you. Tell us your life experience.
Yes, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. So I'm Massar Diop from DHL. I'm actually at the moment based in Dakar, Senegal. I recently relocated from France. So my role within DHL is the business development for humanitarian logistics within the group. DHL is a global, obviously, as a global footprint company, and we all understand that logistics sometimes, can be up to 50, I think, % of the overall cost when it comes to disaster response. So, being from Senegal, developed countries, we do interact with a number of UN agencies or NGOs. So naturally, I grew up understanding their roles, and the impact that they had in our society, in particular in Senegal and developed countries. So, so further on my career, I had the opportunity to join DHL, and I've joined the Department of Humanitarian Logistics. So I was able to not only contribute as well directly to the effort or the performance of UN or NGOs' performance on the ground when it comes to assisting people in need. So second of all, we are a global company, as I say. We do have colleagues all over the world. So whenever we intervene in one country, it's not only obviously for the sake of humanity, but we do help local colleagues that are very often affected with that disaster, natural or man-made. So I've been with DHL, as I say, for the last 15 years. I had a chance to be very active, to intervene in the crisis in the tsunami, the Haiti crisis, obviously, and more recently, we've extremely active in Yemen as well as Syria when it comes to shipping relief items. We are quite active as well when it comes to a number of public health programs. One of the most popular is called NTD, what's it called? Neglected tropical disease, where we do ship about 600 tons of medicines, temperature control, all over the world with the support of WHO and a number of NGOs. I'm sorry, life and science customers, the likes of GSK, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. I mean, you name it. So within DHL, I think what is important when it comes to disasters in particular, we understand that disasters, the impact of response to disaster can be determined in the next couple of hours in particular. And from my experience, we noticed that every time that we were intervening when they were doing disasters, one of the first bottleneck that we're facing was was at the airport. Either extremely crowded airport, process were all over the place. Obviously, there's a disaster, everything is upside down. So it is in that logic that DHL actually created what we call GUARD. It's getting airport ready for disaster. This is a program that has been launched about 15 years ago. And then what we do with the help of, or the support or the collaboration with the UN UNOCAR, we do assess airports. So far, we've been able to actually assess about 40 airports globally by pinpointing, where the bottlenecks may come. When it comes to warehousing, for example, do we have the capabilities to actually store goods before they are being dispatched to the end users? So we do that, and then not only we've done to 40 airports, we also dedicate or focus on the specific airports that are known to be regional hub. So we did it for Panama, for example, in Dubai, between Singapore and Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and as well as Belgium, where we do assess airports for the name of UN. We also do have a team that we call disaster disaster response team, which is a team of volunteers within the group DHL with a range of skills and experience. And they support when it comes to emergency logistics operations by being, they are warehouse specialists, as I say, they could be airport ramp operations. And then those are dispatched, we work closely with the UN. So whenever there's a disaster and that, for example, the UN feel the need for DHL to dispatch that response team, we are the capability to actually have the capability to dispatch in less than 48 hours and beyond the grounded airport and support the UN. So this is what we do. We do work with a number of customers. I mean, UNHCR is actually one of our global partners. So if I had to get to your second question when it comes to what we could have done, from my experience, obviously, I'm coming from a commercial background, and then we just, the feeling or the observation that we have is sometimes, some of the players or humanitarian organizations can be very transactional when it comes to purchasing logistic services. So we've seen it, for example, when it comes to risk in particular. they tend to, my conclusion, or at least my experience, is that, risk usually, those UN agencies or NGOs, I'm sorry, they tend to push the risk of the operation on the commercial side, on DHL, on this perspective, and this, I think, can be a turnoff with a number of our program within DHL. And I also feel that this is obviously a personal, the experience that I had, that when it comes to disasters, I think doesn't end only after items actually delivered. There's quite often we had cases when we had to intervene back on the name of a number of agencies because programs were cut off right after they were goods were received, and there was no necessary follow-up, which sometimes can take longer than expected. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much my position. As I say, I mean, it could be maybe a very commercial perspective, but I think for the humanitarian players, as a commercial, as I say, counterpart, the more strategic they are when it comes to buying logistic services, and the more I think it will improve their performance, in the sense that we had cases where, because some of our partners were looking to act on a very transactional level, their cost went up by up to 20%, and to us those 20% could have been end up buying more relief items or more impact on the ground. So purchasing services, I think it's something from my end could help, I think, the humanitarian players to be more efficient on the ground.
Massar, that was fantastic. Thank you. And I think everybody should appreciate the commercial sensitivity of what you said. You did that with extreme diplomacy. So that was fantastic from my point of view. And finally, William from the UNHCR. Are you there, William? I can't see you, but I'm sure you are. Yes, you're there. Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan, and thank you to all the previous facilitators that presented their stories. It's good to see the tone. It's refreshing to hear people speaking about disasters in just normal language outside the big meeting rooms of diplomatic UN and all of that. So I really appreciate it. I'm a Lebanese guy who grew up in civil war Lebanon. That shaped me initially to be a human rights defender. I worked on enforced disappearances, basically making the case and tracing people who have disappeared and negotiating with people with power and guns to prove that someone is in a secret jail somewhere and try to release them. In 2006, war hit Lebanon again. At the time I was working as a human rights activist at night. My day paying job was in the banking system. I wanted to join the national relief effort. So I took a break of 1 week from the bank and volunteered as a driver to one of the international organizations, because international organizations could actually drive deep in the country and see the amount of destruction that has happened. And I guess that 1 week turned to 15 years now. I got stuck, addicted to humanitarian work, and that took me to different jobs. I today coordinate the official response of the UN and NGO system to human rights issues in times of crisis, which we call international protection. Our network works in about 35 operations around the world, mainly in conflict settings. What is the reality today, I think, as compared to 30 or 40 years ago, when the UN humanitarian system was created, is that the majority of the responders today are local actors. I think out of the 1,000 members that respond on the front lines, over 900 are organizations working in their own country, people working in their own communities, etc. And that's a game changer that we have to take into account. But let me focus on one thing that I've learned over these operations, and then move to the 3 points that I hope to change. In 2008, I was living in a camp in Uganda on the border with Congo. That's a camp that was receiving people fleeing from Congo, running away from war and coming to some kind of safety in Uganda. The camp was, the closest town was about 15, 20 kilometers away. It had everything in terms of safety. You had a small market, you had some fishing, there was football games, small school. So life was running, but it was a safe, slow environment. And my job was, we were receiving about 1,000 people on foot every day. These people have crossed through hell, really, to arrive to the camp, running away from their villages being burned. And my job was to screen or talk to people that are arriving and identify those who had more urgent needs than others, for health or medical reasons or for trauma reasons, etc. And one day I was sitting and talking to a family, and I see a tall guy walking towards me, and I glimpsed like this, and I looked again, and there was this tall guy carrying another guy on his shoulders. And then I looked again, and the guy on the shoulders had his legs amputated. So you had this tall guy carrying another guy without legs on his shoulders. And looking more, I could see that the tall guy, the guy that is walking, had a cane in his hand and holding with the other hand. So the tall guy was actually blind, carrying the guy that didn't have legs. So you had a guy that couldn't see, carrying and walking with a cane, a guy that couldn't walk who was directing him. And then, of course, they got my attention, and I spent the next 2 years getting to know them really well. And these guys had this magical energy. They got hit, and they stood up again. They got hit, they stood up again. Their life story is incredible. And the only thing these two guys wanted since the beginning was to open an electronics shop and fix more radios and fridges. And they didn't need anything else. They didn't ask for anything else. And I guess many of us on this call have stories similar to that. And the only thing you can take out of this is people are ready to get going. They just need a small chance. And we don't have any right to be skeptical. We have to hope. If they can hope to move onwards, we have to at least pay that back and not be skeptical about all the work and all the problems that we have in the world. We have to have this stubborn, keep pushing, not in a naive way, but in a real way. And that shapes a bit the way we operate on human rights issues in times of conflict. And the first thing that I would like to change is that we stop looking at the tip of the iceberg. We look at what's actually happening underground. Take it today, the Sahel of Africa. We speak a lot about lack of food in some contexts. And many of our organizations walk into a household and try to look, if there is food on the table in this tent or this hut or this house. And if we don't find food on the table, or we count calories, or we do our assessments and all of this, then we distribute food. And sometimes we do find food on the table, and then we don't, we think that's all right. And that's never enough in complex settings. Sometimes food is on the table because a child has dropped out of school and is working and is able to bring some money home for the family to eat. Sometimes a girl was married off in a horrible way, and family got paid for it to have food on the table. And this cycle of interlinkages between the needs, this comprehensive story that Elizabeth spoke about, this interlinkages of all these elements to form dignity that that all the speakers spoke about so far is so real. So we shouldn't rush in understanding the situation and reacting. We have to look beyond the tip of the iceberg and see not only what's on the table, but also what's happening under the table. The second, and that takes me to the second element that, again, all speakers have converged to it. It's local actors. The only group of actors that really have the trust of their community and have the know-how and have the perseverance and the capacity to stay as long as the problem remains are local organizations, people working in their countries, in their societies, in their communities. And we have to flip upside down the international aid system from being planes flying into countries to deliver aid to a place where we rely and bring the international resources as fast as possible, as close as possible to the local actors that are delivering. Otherwise, it's stupid, it's not efficient, and it also takes me to my third point. This, again, two of the previous speakers alluded to, is we live in a world where we have to recognize that problems are interlinked, and we have to move away from a charity mentality to a partnership with communities mentality. Charity might feel good for a second, but it's not smart. One, for the person who's giving it, and two, for the person receiving it. So just from a pure mathematical perspective, it doesn't work. You need a serious partnership with the people that are affected by a disaster or a crisis, by their way of organizing things to respond in a way that preserves and maintains dignity, and do it in a very humble way, where if it's an international organization coming in, it's largely coming in to learn how to respond to the crisis rather than to teach everyone and bulldozer and go in all guns blazing, so to speak. So that takes me to maybe a concluding thought. I think that the experience and expertise we have in the global south in responding to crises is solid, is there. And we need to see this focus on local action at the center of international aid. But also we need to see in international organization this local expertise coming there. We need to see leadership and policies and approaches in international organization come from communities affected by crises and come from this genuine, authentic experiences that understands that the worst part of a disaster is not to take the hit, because people are resilient, they can take hits. It's to take the hit and just be alone, be not seen, be invisible, be forgotten. And that hurts, and that hurt lasts for years, if not decades for some communities. So we need more courage in telling the story. We need more courage in speaking truth to power. And we need to be there on the ground with the people. So I'll stop here, Alan, and over back to you.
That's absolutely fantastic, William, and again, inspirational. Now, before we open it up to the discussion, I've got a secret guest. So, Dr. Jackie Malouf, are you there? I can't see you, but that's probably because I'm incompetent technically. There you are. You were just going to give us 4 minutes on your experience of the explosion in the Lebanon, in Beirut, which must have been appalling. So over to you, if you can keep it to 4 minutes so we've got a good discussion. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Alan. Hello, everyone, wherever you are, and really thank you for this opportunity. Well, William, we are from the same country. I don't know if you were here. I'm hoping you were not here for the Beirut blast. It was really horrible. My name is Jackie Malouf. I'm the founding president of Dialab, the National Diabetes Organization in Lebanon. And for 11 years now, we've been raising diabetes awareness and training professionals, as well as our volunteers, and recruiting more volunteers to create a sustainable educational system to control and stop the tsunami of diabetes. We were working all the time across Lebanon and helping not only Lebanese, but also non-Lebanese communities living on Lebanese soil. Lebanon has been undergoing since 2018 civic riots, a harsh economic situation, and currency devaluation. And of course, the global pandemic came after that. And we thought that was enough to bear with until the Beirut blast happened. August 4th was a normal day until in the afternoon, a little after 6 p.m., the blast happened. It was a busy day, the streets were busy. Little did we know that it was going to happen. We couldn't react. If I want to speak about myself, I'm about 10 minutes distance only, and from my house, I could see the port. The blast was so big, I thought it was the one big earthquake that everyone talks about in California, for instance. I didn't know what it was. We were screaming, we were lost, scattered glass and all this. The point is that the blast, can we share please the slide, Alan? Can someone share the slide for me?
Marina, if you can, thank you, Marina.
So that horrible blast categorized one of the major accidental explosions in the whole world, left over 200 dead people, over 7,500 injured, and it left homeless over 300,000 families. Not to mention the mental damage and the sadness and the despair. Were we ready? I think all of you know the answer. Of course, we were not ready. I don't think no matter how much we get prepared, we structure ourselves, we make policies, we prepare strategies, we can never be ready to face such a major disaster. The response of Dialab for August 5th blast started on, for August 4th blast started the very next day. You can see our volunteers on the ground. We were going over the destructed areas, over the glass, to reach out to people, to see their needs in medications. And we started the very few days after that, we started giving the medication. The notes we took were immediately sent to prepare. Our team was preparing the medication and giving the medication supplies to everyone living with diabetes or any other non-communicable disease. What called my attention is that the first people on the ground were us, the local NGOs. We were too many, we were doing too many things, no specialty there. We could not say we only care for diabetes. We were giving away bread. We were lifting things from the ground. We were doing anything and everything. And then I am sure of the importance of big international NGOs, but the point here is people trust us. People know us. We are their people, and they want us to deliver to them what they need. The international NGOs, of course, their help came later, and later on came the donations. But my point here is, although we thank everyone who supported Lebanon after this horrible hit that we got, I noticed, and everyone here noticed around me, that we could do a lot more if the international help supported us as local NGOs, rather than to wait to prepare their teams and send them over and make tents and put them on the ground. That took them at least a month. During that month, people were agonizing. People were still losing, injured people were dying. Dead people were appearing from under the destruction. The very important thing here, that we share the same fear with our community. We don't need translation. We speak their language. We feel what they are feeling. We were there when what happened to them happened to us. That is a barrier that international NGOs sometimes find really hard to cross in order to get to local communities. We heard the same screams. We felt the same fears. We were there. That's what I want to say. We worked very hard to prepare an emergency disaster response that we were not ready for. If I want to talk about readiness, we were not ready. If I want to talk about the response, it started immediately, and day by day, 9 months after, we are still updating our policies and our programs to make a better response. If I want to talk about the recovery, I think it's still far away. It's very slow. The pain is there. The mental effect and the mental impact on young and adults and elderly is still there. It will take a long time to disappear, especially that the need now is still there. People felt sympathy with Lebanon right after the explosion. Donations started coming in, but there is no sustainability in that. Yet, I want to say this at the end. I will not cross my time. Thank you, Alan. I'm very proud of our local communities, of our local NGOs, of our social entrepreneurs, because they were the ones to be there. They were the frontliners. We are the frontliners. We are still on the ground. We thank all the international help, but my wish, since everyone was wishing for something, my wish is for the big international NGOs, thanking them, so I'm not misunderstood, for all their effort. I hope and I wish they direct their help and some of the resources to support the local NGOs, because we have no barriers contacting our people. We have no barriers crossing the doors and getting inside their homes. We have no barriers talking to them and understanding them. Thank you very much. I'm touched by everything I heard. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jackie, for that personal experience. That's just, I have to say, because I didn't know what I was going to hear, two things. Firstly, the personal experiences and the observations are frankly deeply moving. But secondly, that there are some really strong, consistent themes. And I just wanted to pick up, there's a couple of questions which popped into the chat line from Mariana earlier. And the first was from Denzel, I think somewhere in Africa, but I may not have got that right, just saying, how do you prioritize? And Meenakshi, if I can just start with you, what's your experience of prioritization? And because I know that you've dealt with disasters in Kerala and the Bay of Bengal. So Meenakshi, are you there? If you could just comment on that, because it's a real issue, isn't it?
It is, Alan. I think, and especially in big disasters where you have limited resources and you're trying to reach people. Our line on that has been very clear. We try and focus on the most neglected communities. We try and go to the most remote geographies. We try and look at the gaps because there is when a disaster happens, there are a lot of actors who come into the picture. There are a lot of agencies, government, non-profits, relief agencies, rescue agencies. A lot of that happens. So I think with as a non-profit with limited resources, we have a very clear line that we will not be where the main thing is happening, where all the agencies are there. We try and go the extra mile, try and go to the places, the communities who are not able to access the main relief work going on. And the second thing we try and apply ourselves to and our resources to is that we try and look at disasters which mostly get neglected because they're not talked about so much in the media. like, there are fires which happen which don't get talked about in the media. There are there is drought where people suffer, but because drought is not it's not like a flood or a earthquake which becomes very visible to people, and yet people suffer a lot. So we try and put our attention to that. We try and look at the gaps in other development, disaster response work which is going on, so that we can sort of address those needs which are not getting fulfilled otherwise, and we try and sort of go into those aspects. It is a tough call, because there are some geographies where, there's a lot of interest, because there is sometimes a lot of corporate sector, a lot of other presence, where people want to come and talk, invest in disaster response or rehabilitation. There are some geographies which get so neglected, like in India. The northeastern part of India is something where we are trying to get more and more attention in, and more resources in, especially in disasters, because otherwise they don't get the attention and the resources. So in a way, we look at disasters as an opportunity also to get resources to places and to communities and to people. Like I was saying, poverty being as we see poverty as an ongoing disaster, so a natural disaster then becomes like a opportunity to how to get the resources to people. I hope that answers the question.
No, so it's really tough to prioritize, but actually, if you can use it then to discuss and influence readiness, and I think that was the second question, and I'm going to ask Gabby first, because and then I'll come back to you, Meenakshi, and the others. Questioner asked about how do you set a criteria for readiness, and it's an extremely good question the way it's phrased. How could, from your experience, people be more ready, Gabby? And then I'll come back to Masar as well on that, because I think it's a really interesting point. Gabby, over to you.
Well, Anna, I think information is key. We live in a world where technology allows us to get information about everything. And sadly, we don't use it to be ready and to prepare our communities for disaster. If you go through the majority of the countries, you can't find a database of grassroots organizations who knows how to attend people in disasters. And that will be a great advance, because if you can have that information, you can deploy resources directly to the organizations that are on place. As William said, don't make sense that you have to fly people from US to Argentina to attend a disaster, or from UK to Colombia to attend a disaster. If you know where is the people who knows how to do it locally, you can spend less resource in bureaucratical issues and logistical movement, and that is key. And the only way to be prepared, and the only way to know what you need to know in order to do that, is get the information from the communities. And the other thing is share the information. Most of the international agencies that have this kind of information don't want to share it with other organizations, or with private companies, or with local governments, because information is power, and we need to be aware of that. If you democratize and you open that information to everyone, every company in the world can call directly to the organization who is working in the rural areas of India and say, oh, Meenakshi, we want to support your program in India because we want to support that community. Or they can call Elizabeth and say, oh, Elizabeth, I want to do a houses in Ibagué in your program directly. And you don't have to go through the government, the international agency, the third intermediary, 4, 5, 6, and you are leaving money that way. For me, use the technology for good is one of the things that we need to learn how to do as a social entrepreneurs. Use the technology to get data and to democratize the information to everyone.
And it's living, that issue is living at the moment because of the discussion around the patents for the COVID vaccine. It's the same underlying issue, isn't it? It's The tension between people trying to protect what they see as their IPR and actually treating the people on the ground with the appropriate dignity and giving them choice, but also having the local representation. That's it. Masa, I'm bouncing around here, so poor people are going to get suddenly railroaded into commenting. Masa, would you like to comment? Because you made some very striking remarks about the readiness program for the airfields, and yet the transactional element of what you do being pretty harsh and not always dealing the right way. It's do you recognize what you've heard, and any more reflections on what could be done to improve readiness? And I've lost him. Hope he's there still. Masa, are you there?
I'm here. Can you?
I've got you. Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what happened, but I mean, it's. I mean, coming back to your question, I think this is a question that we even ask ourselves internally, and obviously the approach with DHL was to create a control tower.
Yep.
So what we've done, we created a global control tower, which is dedicated to humanitarian logistics, where obviously the location was important. So we strategically located in Dubai. Why Dubai? Because it's halfway between Asia and the rest of the world, and knowing that most of the supply usually are either coming from Asia or going to Asia. So having the control tower based in Dubai was actually able us to respond quite quickly whenever necessary. And this is what this is a concept that we actually propose to our customers. By having strategically our offices or our task team based in Dubai, we can propose directly services to our partners that they can benefit from. For example, there's quite a few customers with who we do pre-positioning warehousing in Dubai. We've also done some in Panama, so that help to react whenever there's a disaster. We know that it's extremely hard to predict when a disaster is going to happen, but I mean, with the data that we have, we tend to know more or less the area when it's going to happen. By knowing this, it is sufficient, or at least it's a good start to actually start working on what we call route mapping, so that allows us, whenever there's a disaster, to know how quick we can react, dispatching the goods, not only by the transportation, but also looking at the process, the clearance process at origin and destinations, knowing that most of, for example, that those humanitarian logistics company are tax exempt. There is a process. Just because it's tax exempt doesn't mean you can just clear customs as you want. There is a process that needs to be put in place. So we are able to actually put some pre-process. So whenever a disaster occurs, then response can be as quick as possible. But what I also want to mention, or maybe it's a remark as well. I mean, it's one of the challenges that we face, or one of the challenges. Let's say, one of the remarks that we notice is that whenever there's disasters, it seems to be some internal competition within some of the humanitarian players. It's all about being the first one on the ground. And there's been situations where we got caught in the middle, where our role is to provide services, but we ended up being accused to be biased with some other NGOs. And I think this is something that also, I think maybe it's worth noticing. Yes, it's important to be on the ground as soon as possible, but I think that the teamwork, should be the priority. And then this is unfortunate, but this is a real situation that we experience internally, and it actually raised quite a lot of questions, how, when it comes to confidentiality, as you mentioned earlier, colleagues from South America, how we should deal with some some of the NGOs or UN agencies when they come to us and ask us for some expertise, and we have to demonstrate it. So confidentiality is actually quite important, because there's been moments, as I say, that we actually kind of burn our fingers.
Yeah,
But
no, so you're in a real position of we say in England, between a rock and a hard place, but I know you've lived in England, so that's okay. Thank you, Massar, and Elizabeth. I'm going to come to you for you're really very focused on readiness, aren't you? This is how do you promote that conversation, firstly, and secondly, we've heard a lot about trust in local NGOs as being an absolutely crucial, or local organizations, SEs, what do you want to call them? How have you built that trust, and what have been the barriers to doing that? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Those are great. So how do we promote readiness? Well, we're promoting prevention, right? I've got this book too, right? I can't see it. The Ostrich book, yes.
Oh, you got the book too. There you go.
Of course. Yes. Yeah, it's really informative. It's very interesting to understand and cover all the biases, why people don't invest in prevention, because that's, again, I've been talking a lot about post-disaster work, but really Build Change is focused on preventing disasters from happening now by strengthening buildings. And what we've found in our work is, again, you've really got to understand as much as you can, try to walk in someone else's shoes, what really motivates people. And we found that if we go into a neighborhood in a pre-disaster context that hasn't had a disaster, and we say, oh, your house is going to fall down in the next earthquake, people are, just going to give us a blank stare. What we have found is that what really motivates people are elements related to growth and things that impact their daily lives. So in Philippines, for example, we've been able to market a lending product because people can not only strengthen their building for the next hurricane or typhoon, but they can also add a second story, right? So they're motivated by growth to add a second story that they can rent out or use for their extended family or those types of benefits. Also, we found that people say, well, yeah, okay, I get that, but my roof leaks, or I don't have a security wall between me and my neighbor. And so if we're able to bundle these prevention things that strengthen the structure to withstand the next disaster with elements that improve people's daily lives, then that's what really is meaningful to the homeowners that we work with in our markets. So how do we promote trust? Yeah, that's a great question. And it's the theme that everyone has been talking about. I mean, our team in Colombia is primarily Colombian. Our team in Indonesia is primarily Indonesian. And so we hire people from the neighborhoods where we work and from the local communities and use them as the avenue for building trust within the communities. It takes time, it takes relationship building, it takes listening. And in some cases, we've actually not partnered with NGOs because it's actually the public sector and the private sector that is more well positioned to create change in these sort of long-term development projects that we're working on. So in Colombia, for example, it's really the private sector doing the construction, and it's the public sector that's in the position to provide the subsidy. And there's limited involvement from local NGOs. It's mostly Build Change as the systems change catalyst, as the social entrepreneur, and the public sector and the private sector. So in some cases, we're actually leveraging relationships with those two sectors, less so NGOs. Now, in other contexts, it's NGOs are definitely there and definitely present, but it really depends on the context and depends on what's needed.
Yeah. And William, to come to you, because your story of the man carrying the guy on his shoulders who was actually telling him where to go. I mean, that will live with me for the rest of my life. It's just the most extraordinary story. And yet all they wanted to do was open an electrical shop and do stuff. I mean, that is a real reflection of the resilience that people have, and Jackie, to some extent, with her story of the Lebanon, also covered that. For you, William, you've obviously worked in deeply extreme situations, but are there opportunities there for social entrepreneurs to actually engage in this process and to support it, or are you or are some of your experiences so far on the extreme that there's nothing there? Just do you recognize that as a possible model? Long question, I apologize. Where are you, William? I've lost you. You must be there somewhere.
I must be there somewhere. Listen, this year, our plans are to reach holistically, I guess, 230 million people in need. And these are conservative plans. These are plans based on assessments driven by the formal humanitarian system. Now, our plans require different types of resources. It requires financial resources, and that's an important pillar. We shouldn't let the big donor countries off the hook for that. That should remain important, and it's a lifeline. It's real. We need finances, but we also need acceptance by the community. We need access to the community to be able to deal with the issues that require cultural know-how, etc. And with the finances, this is equally important. But then the third layer is that the solutions and the type of thinking, the reading of the problem that social entrepreneurs bring is different. I mean, we had some of the speakers today, the speaker from the US, this fresh approach to reading the problem and hence finding a solution Elizabeth presented is refreshing, is different. It might not be shocking because it makes sense, but sometimes big machinery, finding common sense in big machineries is not so common. So you need this fresh take. So where we need the social entrepreneurs, where we need them as organizations, is to help us read the problems differently and find different solutions that we can scale up. But it's equally important that we as international organizations get out of the way of social entrepreneurs. The job of social entrepreneurs is not to support us to do our job, it's to support communities to move ahead with their life. So it's equally important to be aware of a mature partnership and a mature deal where, yes, we collaborate, where we can collaborate, and we should, as international NGOs and big UN agencies, sometimes get out of their way and let the best who can handle it in specific situation do that. And that requires a focus on the objective, on the goal, not on self-promotion, not on looking at a humanitarian action as a market that we want to cut part of its share. And to do that, we go back to the idea of dignity at the center. Is our holistic approach needs to be focused on that one single element and do whatever is needed to do so. We're having a fantastic conversations with Lucy, who's with us on the call, Perkins, and Innovation Norway, who's also with us on the call, to try to see what can we actually take forward. And one of the challenges we find is a simple one when it comes to human rights issues in times of crisis, is that we are too legalistic and too international lingo driven we are distant from the fact that all humanitarian principles and human rights principles actually comes from cultures on the ground. And the way they are explained in different countries makes sense locally. And that barrier that comes with the language we use, with the reference, social and cultural references we use, is sometimes a real obstacle for trust, and as such to be able to do what we want to do. So I want to throw this out. One of the major challenges we find is this cultural sensitivity on issues that are very difficult. We're talking about sexual and gender-based violence. We're talking about the human trafficking. We're talking about children being recruited by armed groups. You can't barge into a community and say, you're not allowed to do that, that is wrong. It might feel right to do so. You might feel good about you that you're able to stand up and say that, but that won't help. You need to find the language and the approach and the tonality that helps at the end. And that transformation of humanitarian principles and human rights angle to locally accepted approaches that actually makes a change is a crucial area that is a long-lasting challenge. And I don't know if social entrepreneurs can help us with their tactics and approaches to overcome it.
That is absolutely insightful. It's also the most fantastic segue to me recalling many conversations I've had with Meenakshi, because you'll have gathered that she and I go back a year or two now. But the language and the style of communication is absolutely critical to exposing these opportunities to be creative, to be imaginative. So I'm looking at my clock here, and we've just got 6 minutes to go, and I'm just going to paint a vision that our issue-based group at Catalyst is beginning to evolve, and ask you then each to comment on it. The first and absolutely fundamental principle is that local social entrepreneurs and people on the ground have the trust of their communities and have the ability to influence very much within the cultural context that William talked about. So the vision that I have that we're going to be working on is that those groups across the world in their own different organizational contexts need to become part of the readiness and part of the communication, both with public, private sector, but also with NGOs, because they have the ability to short circuit the way in which disasters are firstly anticipated, but secondly then dealt with, and then the recovery that comes afterwards. And Gabby talked eloquently about the technology and being able to link and communicate within each locale. We certainly see the possibility for that technology. We also see the possibility for online training, and that, to play to Massar's point, would help to reduce some of the transactional costs that go with, as it were, arriving and trying to do stuff and being constrained by budgets and so on. And what that would do is, firstly, it would bring to the attention the needs for readiness, because somebody said, I forget who it was now, disasters are reasonably predictable. It's just the timing and the scale and the impact that's going to vary. Secondly, that we can prepare for them in that context. Thirdly, we can be prepared for them. Thirdly, we can accelerate the response and make it more relevant on the ground, as we heard from Jackie, but also from others. And fourthly, we're in a position to then orchestrate the recovery beyond the immediate response having made sure that the right materials are appearing. And that to me forms a coherent story in which social entrepreneurs are part of a new solution. So going around the block, Meenakshi, and I probably haven't articulated it well enough, that's an emerging vision. Do you want to comment, and then I'll go through each panelist? Meenakshi, anything to say on that?
No, Alan, I'm sort of wanting to take up that vision in a very real sense. I think I think the only reality that I'm cognizant of is that we are in the midst of a disaster, and I think none of us wants to be treated like a victim for very long. This is one disaster which has created a common experience for all of us of what it is to be like in a disaster, because mostly otherwise it's in some rural areas. So if we can create a reality which resonates with the values that we stand for, and we don't have a kind of a double sort of value, one for ourselves and one for the people that we work for, I think that's a very, very important lesson and a very, very important value to take forward.
Thank you. Gabby, quickly, because we're running out of time. So can you top and tail that? Do you want to add? Did the vision work for you?
Definitely not.
Right. That's good.
No,
I'll take any criticism.
Definitely not. But I think that we need to be aware that the only way to address this kind of emergencies and disasters is with everyone working together, the local NGOs, the international agencies, the governments, and everyone. But it's important to be aware that we need to break some myths, not necessarily through the government we can have more impact, not necessarily without the local NGO we can have more impact, not necessarily just being prepared we can have more impact. We need to get to the data, and I share in chat some of the data of the impact of Colombian government versus a coalition of local organizations, international NGOs, private companies, and civil society working together. And if we work based on data, we can be more and more effective. And I think that is, yes, work with everyone, but based in the evidence, not in what we believe.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for pulling me up. I think I was closer to you than you interpreted, but never mind. There you go. Elizabeth, and we are completely out of time now, but carry on. Elizabeth, are you there? Do you want to add?
Yeah, I know we're almost out of time. Yeah, I think there's so much more that can be done to prevent disasters from happening. And I think we're just starting. I feel like my whole career has been on post-disaster, the last 7 years on prevention. And I think there's so much more that can be done there. And I'm excited to see, the lessons from post-disasters continue to be replicated and expanded by social entrepreneurs and other organizations in a prevention space, because I think we've got to get ahead of these disasters. And I know we can do it if we use technology, if we impact policy, if we leverage all the stakeholders, if we access financing, all of those things are there. We can make it happen.
Fabulous, thank you. Massa, final comment, and then William.
Yeah, just quickly, it's pretty much a recap of what has been said earlier. I mean, I think data should be driving the response. I mean, at least to have an effective response. The needs tends to be the same. The issue tend to be the same. So I think the data speak for itself. So maybe it's time to actually make the best out of it, but also preventing disaster. It's also as crucial as a response. Obviously, some of them are not out of our human control, but most of them, or quite a few of them, are actually man-made. So maybe we need to look at how we can actually prevent getting to the disaster phases.
Brilliant, thank you.
Back to you, Alan.
William, finally, over to you. Last but not least.
Two words: go local and be humble and kind. That's that's what is needed.
Okay. We're out of time. We're 2 minutes over. Thank everybody on the panel for your contributions. Thank the attendees for coming. Thank you so much around the world. I embrace you. For me, this has been inspiring. I can see a blog coming in the Catalyst firmament to try and summarize some of those conclusions. And we'll try and get that out onto social media, and we'll use it to inform our work. Thank you all so very much. Peace be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.